Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Megan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey everyone.
Cool. And so, Megan and I had met through a mutual contact that got us connected, and so here we are. This fellow siblings just chatting it up. So, Megan, if you could lay out your family structure, like in terms of like birth order or age difference between you and your siblings, and who has a disability.
Yeah, for sure. So I am the oldest in my family. My middle brother has has a diagnosis of autism, and then my youngest brother is neurotypically developing, and that's the three of us.
Cool. That sounds fun. Kind of just like, yeah.
Yeah, three peas in a pod.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of your brothers, on the spectrum is a pretty diverse thing, especially nowadays. Are there any like fun facts about like his particular diagnosis or anything like that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I would say, as far as like on the spectrum, he's definitely like low support need. He's pretty independent. He is very like cognitively able, like puts the rest of us to shame. Um, yeah, like he knows things like he's the guy you want on your trivia team.
I
Like,
was just thinking that. I was like, oh, if I
yeah,
ever need to like look something up, I'm gonna go to your brother. Like that's which makes
100%.
it yeah, it makes it super fun and convenient. But other times you're like, I just no, I don't want to know the 10,000 other things you're about to say. Like I just want to eat dinner in
Yep,
peace.
yep, yeah, no, pretty much. He's the academic challenge guru in our house, but yeah, he's I would say like in terms of like a social media or like a media figure, he's more of like a Sheldon type, if
Oh,
you
okay,
will.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less like Brainiac than that. Like he's goofy, he's really
Yeah,
funny.
but in that
Um,
direction of if people needed like a reference to kind of like
yes,
envision
yeah,
him. Yeah.
yeah.
Cool,
But
yeah.
he has like yeah, no filter. Like whatever he's saying, whatever he's thinking is like coming out. So um,
Yeah.
but it can, which has its pros and cons, but for the most part he's super funny.
Cool. All right. So are there any so we like to keep an open forum. So we can talk about whatever you would like to talk about. So is there anything in particular that you would like to talk about on the podcast?
Yeah, so I was kind of, I know I've like heard on past podcasts like how you guys kind of talk about like experiences that have shaped you and
Mhm.
um like shaped your relationship. Um and I would just always find it really interesting to like reflect on um I feel like how my relationship with my sibling has changed so much over the years as
Mm.
um
Mhm.
we've grown up. He and I are only 2 years apart, so I feel like we were really close in age, and because of that, um, he was um like I didn't really get his diagnosis at first. My parents were like, he has
Mhm.
autism, but you can't tell him; it's a secret,
Oh.
and we'll tell him when he's ready.
Int- oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't heard that one before. Huh.
Yeah. So they didn't really tell him until he was 12. So I had to like actually sit with
Oh.
this secret for a really long time.
That
And
what do you know how old he was when he got diagnosed? Like I mean like that they didn't tell
yeah,
him but that they told
he
you?
was, I think he was officially, I think he got his official diagnosis when he was 3. Um, and that's because, well, it wasn't a thing in the DSM, like didn't exist
Yeah.
really. It was very new to the
Mhm.
scene, but he didn't talk until he was um 3, because well they think he just like couldn't really hear, like his hearing was so bad, so
Oh, okay.
he had like tube surgery, and then after that he like basically started speaking all of a sudden,
Oh,
so they
yeah, so
think
that could
his
have
like
been
hearing was like
completely
underwater.
correlated to that instead and had nothing to do with anything else, right?
Yeah, or it could have
Okay.
been like the language regression that is also common of the diagnosis, so
Yeah.
hard to say, chicken or the egg there, but yeah, so he basically we were kind of all sitting on that for like 10, almost 10 years.
That I was like, I don't even know what that would be like. That's a long time to be to not tell him, and then your parents to not like you all. Just, yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
tried once. I
interesting.
was like, Nick, you're really artistic. And my mom like hit me so fast. She was like, Megan. I was like, Like she knew exactly what I was trying to do too.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny though. Like that's yeah. Like it's such like it's like a joke, but it's not a joke. But like I'm trying to tell you something, but like you don't get. Yeah, like there's so many things to do with that. So like, how did he take it when he like when his parents told him?
So my parents like read so many books, like about like how to say this, how to have the conversation,
Yeah.
and they were so nervous to like tell him because he like with the, they just weren't sure if he had the self awareness to kind of like know that maybe
Oh,
something
okay.
like that he was different in some way. Um,
Yeah.
so they waited until they were like sure that he kind of knew. So um, they sat him down and he was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Uh, can I go play like Crash Bandicoot now?" And they were like, "Do you have any follow up questions?" And he was like, "No, not at this time," and like left the room. And they were like, okay, like
Oh.
it was just a really calm, like
Yeah.
no, he was just like, oh, okay, like great to know. But
Yeah.
and then later he started asking questions, but yeah, when they first told him, he was like very nonchalant about it.
Yeah. That's an interesting like. Do you think your relationship like before and after that point in time was different? I mean,
Um,
obviously
you know,
there's like just the general thing, but like I feel like that's a very
yeah,
key point in time.
I think it was helpful to like after that be able to talk about it more openly. Like before that, I definitely treated him like a sibling, like a typical sibling. Like I,
Okay.
even though he would have meltdowns in pub, like I was just like stop, unacceptable. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
want to go.
like if he was
Yeah,
a normal kid like that, it was your
yeah.
brother.
I was like,
Okay.
stop crying. Like I want to go do this thing. Like what are you?
Yeah.
I'm not making any exceptions for you. And so I think it was like kind of helpful that I did like almost just again I didn't give him any special treatment. I just was like an older sibling, like kind of a bully, frankly. And like I think it was good for our relationship. But then after that, then when he learned, then I like started taking on more of like a helping role.
Yeah.
Um, so like I remember going to speech therapy sometimes with him or like occupational therapy.
Yeah.
'Cause we were at in all those kind of doctor's appointments like all the time.
Yes.
And so his speech therapist asked me to like teach him social skills. So I one day like put on his clothes and I was like, well, I'm gonna teach you how to be like a cool guy. And I was like pretending and like modeling for him like what,
Yeah.
like how to like, what to say, how to interact with like peers, like
Yeah.
but how to be like cool about it. I thought I definitely
Yeah.
wasn't cool. So
As much as like a teenage
hilarious.
girl can be cool. Like yeah, it's like all those movies in the
Exactly.
90s that like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was like the farthest thing from it.
Okay.
So also funny that I thought like I knew. But so yeah, like it was after that I think we got to have more conversations and be open about it and like that's when I took on more of a helping role. And I mean it was still a little rocky because we were
Mhm.
so close in age, sometimes I would get really embarrassed by him.
Okay.
So my mom would like always make me bring him around my friends because
Oh.
he had a hard time like, pursuing peer relationships with kids his own
Mhm.
age. So when I was ever doing stuff with my friends, it was like, Megan, can you bring your brother? And I was always like, oh, eye roll. Like I don't want to. So I definitely thought that for a while, or like I think my mom said at one point for my eighth grade graduation, I asked her not to bring him because I didn't want him to say anything embarrassing and embarrass
Oh
me.
man.
And I don't remember doing that at all. But my
Yeah.
mom respected me and where I was at developmentally because I was so self-conscious at that age.
Yeah.
Um, so she respected me and what I needed, and she didn't. And just her, and my dad came, and um,
Yeah. But that's
so
amazing though that she actually listened like that part in itself. Like I mean, there's multiple things that like amaze me about that story, but that's amazing that she was like really just was like, "Hey, I'm going to honor your request and just and do that." Like that's incredible.
Yeah. My mom is an incredible woman. Like my brother would not be who he is today if it weren't for my mom. Like
Yeah.
my parents were fortunate enough to be in a financial position where my mom could stay at home. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so she took on that role of really being round the clock, like doing the speech, doing the OT, doing everything
Oh,
at
got it.
home.
Okay.
So she like because early intervention wasn't a thing. So she was the early intervention service. Um,
Oh, right, right. Because now, yeah, nowadays it's very different than back when he got diagnosed and everything like that.
yeah,
It's changed so much.
so much, which is awesome. And like that, the services like that, especially are like covered by insurance now. And,
Yeah.
like in New York, anyone, as long as you qualify under the age of 3, you get free ABA services, which is like amazing.
Oh, that I
Um,
didn't know about. Okay.
yeah, which is, it's awesome, that like that's becoming more and more recognized.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if back in the day that was not a thing. And so, yeah, she's
Yeah.
bomb. She read every book. She's your A+ parent for sure. So
Oh.
she's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So then, so like as I guess between that point and then now, as you're both like adults, then how
Mhm.
has that like evolved into kind of now?
So definitely more of a friendship now. Like I think, towards the end of high school, um, I was starting to come to really appreciate him as this blessing in my life and
Mm-hmm.
realizing that because of Nick and his neurodivergence, I feel like I have been so much more like it's just opened my eyes to looking at differences in individuals and just being so respectful of those differences and like
Yeah.
genuinely caring. Um, and so I think that that's, Nick showed me that to have that
Yeah.
worldview. Um, and so I think that's then totally shaped my major in college and my career path.
Okay.
Like I was all set to be like a history major and I wanted to like go into law school and then I took my first psychology class and I was like, just kidding. It's
Oh.
totally psychology for me. I was like reading for fun. Um,
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, no, this is my major. This is it. So I switched my major and I went into the field of psychology. And then he's inspired my research. I've done all my research is on focusing on the sibling relationship,
Mm-hmm.
specifically amongst neurotypically developing siblings and their, um,
Yeah.
sibling with autism. But also just any sort of like atypical sibling relationship in general is my
Yeah.
my my bread and butter. And I think that's it's all inspired by Nick. So now we have this like great relationship. He was my roommate for a couple years while I was in grad school.
Oh, fun.
Um, yeah, like he was like, I want to get out of mom and dad's house. And I was like, yeah, like I don't mind the
Yeah.
company. So, he's such an easy roommate. He's so easygoing. Um, he's definitely messy, but like
I
I
mean,
just had to
I'm
be like, hey
messy,
Nick,
so
clean your
it's
room.
not.
And he's
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't anything like wild. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, he's a lot of fun. He's easy to have around, and now he's actually married, and he and his wife just bought a condo
That's
together, and
incredible, man.
yeah, so he's thriving. He's
Yeah, it's
absolutely
like he's
thriving.
just living an everyday life. You probably wouldn't even know if I like just met him like off the bat just for like 10 minutes or
Yeah,
something. You
you
probably
wouldn't.
wouldn't even know, right?
He's like very like he's able passing, or I don't know the phrase, but
I
something
have
like
no
that.
idea.
Yeah, you wouldn't know until all of a sudden you see him like in the corner, like kind of talking to himself, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe like something's up. But I don't know
Yeah, like
what, but
it's kind of like the longer you spend, then
yeah,
like you would notice it. But like, wow, so that's incredible. That's just yeah.
yeah,
But
he's
because
he's like I think every like my parents when they first got his diagnosis were I'll never forget when my mom did tell me she was crying and sobbing and was like
yeah,
this, your brother's never going to be a normal kid. And it was like
yeah,
so devastated. And he's far and away, like, maybe my mom said it, like every single, like, barrier that they thought he wasn't going to be able to overcome, he's gone and shattered it.
yeah,
So, it just teaches you not to underestimate people with special needs because, they can
yeah.
totally exceed your expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. Well, so it's so fascinating for me to hear about him because for my sister, like is very different. She's much more on the so she got diagnosed at 3 also, which I feel like most for the most
Yeah.
part I feel like generally speaking that's like when they get diagnosed anyway. And I remember like my mom telling me like, "Oh, she's not going to be normal, etc., all that stuff." So I remember that part pretty clearly. And it's this thing where but then so I remember like going to speech therapy and all these things. And it's this thing where she's more nonverbal. So I and so and I remember going into speech therapy, and at some point we stopped taking her, and I don't remember why anymore. I used to like have the whole trajectory memorized of like why we did certain things in therapies and like
Hmm.
like diet stuff and like all there's all these different things that we tried. Um, but yeah, like I remember going to all her appointments and stuff. But and then now it's this thing where she she doesn't talk in complete sentences like in this type of conversation, but she can tell you what she ate for dinner, and she'll tell you what she will eat for dinner for the next like 7 days, which is pretty good because she just has it memorized because she loves to
Uh-huh.
eat, she loves her food and like all of that. And so it's interesting though because like our relationship is so much based on like how I interact with her and like physical presence on some
Mm.
level. Just
Yeah.
because yeah, because she can't I mean, I think if she could talk back to me, she would, which is the fascinating thing. Because like we'll be like in a group situation, and multiple people are talking, and then she'll nowadays she like wants to participate, but the thing is she can't communicate all her thoughts, so she just ends up saying all these key words that may or may not have to do anything with our conversation, but that's like her contribution to it. And so
Yeah.
it's been this like evolution of kind of how like yeah, it's like very much like what I expect, and then it's like, oh, that's all out the window. Let me like adjust and adapt to kind of how she's interacting with the world.
Hmm.
And it's been so fascinating to kind of just just be more like empathetic and sympathetic when you just see stuff or people or situations just like you walk to the grocery store, you're just like, oh, okay, like yeah, it's just very different. It's so interesting. Like it's just in your subconscious too. You don't even like try to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and I found with individual, like I was a direct support staff at an adult day program before I went back to get my master's and stuff. And um, I remember working with individuals, that were like more high need, that sound like that have a more like communication,
Yeah.
barriers, like your sister. And I think even in those moments where I'm like, oh, they might not understand this, or this might have gone right over their head, like they would say something, even if it was just like a 2-word phrase, that really showed me that they actually understood the situation and
Mhm.
like had some insight into like what was going on. And it was sometimes in moments where I was least expected. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, like you are picking up on this.
Yep.
Like, okay. But it definitely was like, yeah, like it's I think it's kind of cool when, you learn to like adjust your expectations. And like my favorite is really kids with like special needs are sneakier than and more manipulative. I think that a lot of people like to give them credit for.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And like I work with now, I'm doing like early intervention with kids, and um they're sneaky and manipulative, just like any other kid. Like, and also food motivated for
Oh
any
yeah.
treat. Like I shamelessly bribe my therapy clients, and they're like, "Oh yeah," like, um. So it's just like funny. They're very reward driven. Like when we do a behavior plan, they're like, "Yes, let's discuss rewards." Like absolutely, mom and dad. Like I want all these toys, and I'm like, "Whoa, hold on. Like that's not
Yeah.
necessarily the point." But love where your head's at.
You're right. Yeah. You're trying to at least motivate in the right direction, so we just gotta like
Yeah.
back it up a little bit instead of just going like full speed. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about like yeah, just the amount of like bribery that's involved because it's just been so long since we've had to use it because it's mostly when like they're younger and they're
Right.
tantruming and running and it's much more like when they can't sit still for like longer than 5 minutes. I think is much more when that kicks in.
100%.
Yeah.
Do you find with your sister now that you are able to like, do you find that her inability to like necessarily fully sustain like a reciprocal conversation makes it hard to like be as close, or do you feel like you take on more of a caregiving role because it's a little
So
more limited?
that's a great question because I am still learning. So part of the thing is that I now am an 11 and a half hour drive from her.
Mm,
So I can only see her, so many times just because that's a longer drive. It's a shorter
absolutely.
flight, but it's still like a time thing, right? And so
Yeah.
I've decided to call her on Skype like once a month because I came to this like as I've been talking to more siblings just interacting with more people stuff. I was like, oh, like I me skyping her is what I can do. Like I can't be there with her, which I miss, but I can Skype her and we can just see what happens. Like if anything, she's very and she got very used to video during the pandemic
Yeah, I
just because
bet.
everyone was on video, and
Hmm.
so at that I think something in her either clicked or she just got adapted to the fact that that's how she sees certain people. Not everyone, but there are certain people like in our family and stuff that she can only see just through video just because they live really far away or just health related things. And so I've noticed that like because now I'm calling more consistently, she will give me like another 10 seconds longer than the previous call. So it's
That's awesome.
fascinating. Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting." And it always throws her staff off every time, which makes me laugh because they're always like, "Oh, she wants to leave." I'm like, "Oh, don't worry about it." Like the fact that she'll let me talk for like 5 minutes, I'm like, "I'll take it." But it's funny because for them they're like, oh, like they want me to talk to her longer or her just to like not. She
Hmm.
watches cooking shows at night. This is what I explain in college. So she likes her
Yeah.
food. It interrupts the middle of the show, but yeah, I've noticed that I think she's learning that that's how I can talk to her when I can't see her. Like that is gonna be the way that she sees me or not.
Hmm.
And so I've noticed that she has given me more she'll give me more eye contact now than like ever before. Like it's been this really fascinating journey with that attribute in particular because obviously like she could not sit or give eye contact to like anyone for 10 years or longer than that. So when she started giving me eye contact solidly probably in the last 5 to 7 8 years I want to say, she's been able to like look me dead shot in the eye and like talk,
Hmm.
like I mean with her eyes, but like it's this thing where I think she, as we've both gotten older and we've now we live, and at that time we were living like, together, but as we've been living apart more, I've noticed that that is a like we're tapping into that part of it more than even her like body language. She'll just like look at me and kind of like give me these facial expressions. I'm like, okay, like I know you're trying to tell me something, but it's just, and part of it's just the nuance of learning what that is now, because her whole like her living situation is different. Mine's different from when we were living together because our rooms were right next to each other, so it was really easy for me to like hop in and bother her and like mess up her toys and like run away. So that part has kind of changed, but yeah, it's been a it's been a very fascinating kind of like development, which is really
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
No, I feel like that's so interesting that you've even just observed the growth in her, you know, wanting to stay on the phone longer with you, or like really trying to make the eye contact, like really genuinely putting in an effort to like, okay, like this is how I get to see my sister now, like let me spend the time with her and like, want to like show up and to spend that time
Yeah.
with you. And that's really cool that, I think sometimes like even my brother has said, um, he has said that like the Zoom kind of takes the pressure off too with the making eye contact. So
Oh.
like you're making eye contact, but it doesn't feel as like direct.
Oh.
So I've
Interesting.
heard from some clients too that it's a little, and also like you can kind of be looking, it can make it look like you're looking, but you're not necessarily having to like look at their eye. Like
Like it's
it,
different from a
yeah,
physical like me and you in the same room versus like me and you over like a camera screen thing.
yeah. So she may actually just genuinely be more comfortable, which is really cool too.
Oh, Yeah, I mean, it was this funny thing where we were trying to figure out like what to use because obviously there's 10,000 platforms you can use too, and I was like, Skype is nice because it's a thing where you can like call someone, right? You can like dial it, or I mean, you put someone's picture. But I was like, oh, but it's nice because she can just do it from kind of whatever device she wants, and that was part of the thing too. Was like I didn't want her to be limited to like one type of thing. And so I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, that allows a lot more because I can use like my computer, I can use my phone, I could use like tablets, like whatever. And so it was, cause, and
Hmm.
it's funny because my parents were like, really, when you use Skype, I'm like, just let me have this. Like I will just we. So when I
Yeah.
call them, I use other stuff when I call them. It's just funny, but yeah, I think that's like her and my thing. It's like it's nice because it's like it's nice because it rings too, right? So it, like, oh, you can like hear the phone, and like I think it makes it more fun
Yeah.
personally. Like, yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I feel that. That's cool. I mean, I
yeah,
think I love that you guys have found your thing, even with being 11 hours apart. That's hard. That's hard to like,
yeah.
forge that kind of relationship. Like even though my brother I think is like, he can talk on the phone like we don't text, we
Yeah.
don't communicate
Okay.
unless we're like really in the same room. He's so bad
Oh,
about
okay.
responding, or he'll like randomly shoot me like a really long text message that's like
Oh, like an essay,
really,
right?
yeah, or it'll be like a very vague. It's like the other day, for example, he shot me
Mhm.
a text and was like, uh, "Hey, what are some dress ideas? I'd like to get Annie a gift." And I was like, "That is so broad. Like, what do you mean? What do you
He's like,
mean
I
dress
need help,
ideas?"
help me. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like, I like, can you give me a little bit more like it? So I followed up and I was like, "Hey, what's it for specifically? Is your birthday coming up? Like, I don't think it
yeah,
is." And he responded back and he was like, "Oh, it's our anniversary." And I was like, "Nick, why don't you just take her out to dinner and get her some flowers? Like, that's all my husband and I do for our
yeah,
anniversary. Like, maybe give that one a try."
yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, great idea." And like, I actually genuinely believe right after he received that message, he like made a reservation and like
Oh, I
it's
100%
actually,
believe that too. Yeah,
yeah, like
yeah.
that is just
Oh,
like
yeah. Yeah,
but otherwise like we don't talk on the phone. And when we do, like, it's so funny because I can tell he's very distracted. Like, he'll be like,
oh,
"Hi, Megan,
okay.
how are you?" And he'll like get through like some of the social niceties of like, "How have you been?" "Good, yeah." And then there'll be like long pause, like he's
Like
clearly like,
waiting, like here's the. I need to say these like 10 things to you, and then like get
mm-hmm,
to the thing. Yeah.
mm-hmm. And then he'll like get right into it, and then it'll be like, "Okay, great talking to you." And like, and so it's funny. Like, I just feel like with every sibling, you kind of find your own unique way of connecting and communicating.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. I think I've been appreciative of that more recently, just because like we're not in the same vicinity anymore. So it's definitely these things where I'm like, oh, I should appreciate these things, even though like before, kind of like when you grow up, it's all very different and stuff like that. But it's definitely a journey just to like see all of
Yeah,
it.
it is. It is. So, even my youngest brother is like has a very different relationship than too with my middle brother. Like,
Okay,
yeah, like I feel like I am the very much the older sibling. Like he goes to me
okay,
when he is probably like I'm not like the pseudo parent.
yeah.
Whereas like I don't think he does that with my youngest brother. And
Oh, okay, yeah. Because it's just
yeah.
like a different like,
Mhm.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah, because yeah, that I think that's been one of the interesting things as I've met other siblings who are either like the oldest or the middle, like there's kind of a variety of things. But it's interesting how as the oldest sibling, there's just no matter how many siblings are younger than you, there's just a certain commonality to it, and then
Mhm.
it's kind of like then all the like the kind of like either in the middle or youngest siblings I talk to, they're all kind of like have a certain commonality to it. So it's so fascinating because like, is there anything that like really different that you found in your research that you like blew your mind? Maybe not to that extent, but like anything that you found like really interesting that you're like, oh wow, like didn't know that.
Yeah, typically, actually, there's been a few studies that have looked at, gender roles and how that, like, not only birth order, but then gender roles and how that,
Yeah.
differ experiences. And for the
Mhm.
most part, women tend, and especially if they're the oldest sibling,
Yeah.
or like you said, like oldest in the birth order of that, where
The
like
the
they would
the
take on more of those
trifecta of
like
things.
parenting roles. Yeah,
Mhm.
they will be more likely to go into a caregiving profession.
Oh,
Mhm.
interesting.
Mhm.
That makes
So,
sense when I think about all the people I met, but I never like connected that in like a regular. Oh, that's so interesting.
yeah.
Huh.
So I found that just like a really neat, like, huh, like that tracks, because
That makes
actually even
sense.
any of my friends that have siblings with special needs, I can see it play out even in, also in chronically ill kind of sibling relationships, which isn't quite the same, but kind of is.
Very there's
And
overlap like in
they're
it. Yeah.
yeah, and they're the women I know have kind of like nursing or some kind of like helping profession, physical therapy, something like that.
Yeah, something that you're helping somebody,
Whereas,
whether it's like disability related, right?
whereas like my guy
Oh.
friends, like not necessarily at all, like just kind of whatever they were good at in school
Yeah.
or like whatever, like not the same.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, at some point I want to be able to have like. I mean, I think the diversity right now that I'm trying to get is pretty decent, given that like I only know so many people and I can only spend so much time on the internet. But it's definitely this thing where eventually I hope to like have more diversity, not just like in age, gender, the whole thing. And so but it's funny because I think about all the people that I have talked to who are when you find people on the internet, you're basically finding people who are advocating in that space, and they're majority oldest siblings that are females. So that's
Yep.
an interesting like
Yep.
correlation that it's funny because it makes complete sense, but I just never connected those things together. But that
Yeah, well,
yeah.
and it's really interesting too. I think there's also a factor of I don't know if you're familiar with the term parentification. I know it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a new like hot word on the
Yeah.
scene. But like there's kind of two different types of
Okay.
parentification. There's like a sibling focus, which is where you're asked to take on more helping roles of
Yes.
your sibling, which is pretty typical in like a special needs sibling relationship.
Yeah.
Then there's also parent focused, where you're asked to then take on parenting, like parent your parent, essentially.
Oh yeah. I
And
did learn about that from my therapist. Did not know there was a word for it, but I do know
yeah,
about that concept.
well, and so it's interesting how the siblings that report both, um, especially because there's kind of a little bit role reversal there where you're
Yeah.
being a parent, like truly parenting your parent,
Yeah.
that adds even more stress and more
Yes.
um just like burden to your life. And so
Yeah.
siblings that experience that tend to feel a lot more resentment for their sibling than the siblings that don't,
Oh,
because they're
interesting.
really
Okay.
like they not
Yeah.
only had to take care of their parent, but they also take care of their sibling. And that's just like a lot to put on a kid when you're like just trying to
Yes.
be a kid,
And it's
you know?
yeah, and it's not that kid's role at all. Like I was talking to another sibling about like how like if you have like a 9-year old, like that 9-year old can just be a 9-year old, but like once you throw in like any like hey your sibling has a disability or whatever it is, chronic illness, etc., like it's just it's they're not that same 9-year old, like it's just it's not
Yeah,
gonna be the same. Yeah.
100%. So yeah, it's interesting then. Like I would love to see a study that sees, and maybe this will like parse this out in my dissertation a little bit,
Yeah.
but um, like to kind of see where if that affects your profession either too. Because if you resent your sibling, like maybe you want to get as far away from like working
Yeah.
with individual special needs as much as possible. Like I don't know if that would affect it at all, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I for myself personally, like I found myself on this roller coaster of if I wanted to be like involved in disability or not. Like it was such like a I want to be a speech therapist, and then I went like I want to be a chemical scientist, and I went through these various like waves for years, like back and forth, and it's something where I remember even like my mom, so she was working full time and then kind of homeschooled my sister for a period of time and then decided to go back to part-time work. And I remember like we had this conversation and she said to me, hey, I'm thinking about being a para, like there's an elementary school kind of like 2 blocks away from where they live. And so she says to me, oh, think about being a para. And like inside I'm like, I don't really like your daughter's right here. And so like I gave her my 2 cents on it because I was like I told her like you have to be able to show up the same for Angela. Like if you can't do that, then don't do it. Like that's not that's yeah. So I gave her my whole thing, but it's so fascinating how. And I remember after that I was like, man, like I don't. I just wanted to do like whatever I wanted to do. It's like it's leave me alone and let me have my life. And it's interesting because I having this podcast is this thing where like it it's kind of like I need to fill the void for me, but it also fills the void for obviously like people like yourself and us as ourselves. And it's like, but
Hmm.
it's like wasn't the intention, but it is the intention. Is I don't know. It's very confusing. Like it's
Yeah, but it's like
yeah,
spreading awareness. It's still helping.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
normalizing the conversation. And,
yeah,
that's something that I think really has just been happening in recent years, that more siblings feel comfortable sharing their experiences and or finding like networks out there,
yeah.
where they can find people that relate to them. Like I wasn't able to find that until college. And then I
Okay.
finally found some friends that like had relatable experiences.
Oh, okay,
But
okay.
I was like, God, that would have been so nice to have, in high school or when I was younger, even where I could have just talked to people, other siblings that get
Yeah,
that get
who
it.
like
Like,
understood. Yeah, who understand like what's happening and stuff. Yeah, they're so and it's such an interesting thing. Like especially when you're going through it in real time, because I feel like there's so much of the conversation now. Like as we're adults, like we're trying to process stuff in real time, and then we're talking about like stuff that happened to us when we were 10 or 15. Because it's just there's so
right.
much going on, but like you can't like yeah you can't unpack it all with any one person, whether that's like your therapist or your friends or your parents or like insert other person here. Like there's just so much
Yeah.
stuff that is. And I think that was the craziest thing, like when I first started going to therapy, like there was just feelings in general that I had, and then my therapist was like, those are normal. And I was like, is it really? And I think yeah, normalization of that is
Hmm.
so important. But especially when I met other siblings and we were talking about the same internal feelings that we have, right? What in real time is like, oh, like that. Not only is it normal, like there's someone actually that understands what my normal is, because our normal
Yeah.
isn't the same as
It's not.
like a typical other typical people's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's another one of the other episodes of the podcast I was listening to where you guys talked about, feeling some guilt or like, kind of feeling like shame or embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
And I like totally related to that. I was like, oh yeah, like I definitely remember feeling that a lot more when I was younger.
Yeah.
Um, my brother would say something in front of my friends that was like totally no filter, and you're like, oh, that was so not appropriate to say. Like it was
Yeah. Like your
wildly
insides just
embarrassing.
die on the inside. You're
Yeah,
like,
I
oh,
was like,
just
"Oh,
go.
oh,
Yeah.
I just want to like
Yeah.
curl in a ball and
Yeah.
melt into the floor."
Yeah.
Um,
Being a turtle shell, just go away. Like
mhm,
just bye.
mhm.
Yeah.
And or like the guilt of like, "Oh, why him, not me?" Like
Yeah.
almost a little survivor complexy of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like why, um,
Yeah.
and like some anger about that, like okay, why him, not me? Like that, I was angry and just confused, and then
Yeah.
I then felt bad, like that he would never live the life that I could live, and I felt guilty over that he would never have, my normal, quote unquote,
Yeah. Your
normal life.
life. Yeah.
And I had a friend though in college then that I was really fortunate to meet, and she also has a younger sibling with autism,
Okay.
and the conversation we had was just one that really stuck with me, and she said what I needed to hear at the time, and it was like, why do you think you know? why do you think you know what his happiness is? Like, why do you think you know better?
Oh,
And
interesting.
I was like, what do you mean? She was like,
Yeah,
why
like,
do you assume that he won't be as happy as you? Like, you don't know. He
oh,
has his own level of
yeah.
happiness. Like, you don't get to be the judge of that. And I was like, oh shit, you're right.
Wow.
Like, I
That is
don't.
like a life changing conversation. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And I was like, whoa. And it totally like
Yeah,
changed my perspective. I like really after that, like those feelings of like guilt and like
yeah,
really went away from me. And just again, like you like having those conversations are so important because you never know when you're gonna like have it with someone or be in that right space where you just hear something that you need to hear. And
yeah,
it like helps kind of resolve some things, which is great. So,
yeah.
like I was really fortunate to meet her.
Yeah, like I think I had something similar happen like when like the first time when I had met like other like siblings like ourselves and I don't remember what we were talking about, but I remember it was just the first time ever that I was telling us like a story or a complaint about my sister, and then they then like understood exactly what I was talking about. Like that was the first time I didn't have to like, oh, because but like there was no like defensiveness net or like
Mhm.
I was like, oh, forget I'm tired. Like I was like, oh, like that, like yeah, the feeling inside is just like, oh, like this is like, yeah, like you find your other half of your soul basically. That's how I describe it to
Yeah.
people because it's very much like I felt like that. Like I felt for so long like growing up like that I had no friends. I mean, like you have friends, but not
Yeah.
really, right? I would see all my friends like have sleepovers together, like go to each other's houses, like do homework, and I was like, I don't like I don't get it. Like I'm like, why can't I be close to other people like that? And then it wasn't until I was probably like late high school or early college or something kind of around that age and I was like, oh, like no, like it's because these are my friends. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah, and
Well,
it
it's the
helps
first
so
time
much.
you feel seen and heard, like you really
Yeah.
feel truly understood. And you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." Like it's such a good feeling.
Yeah, and you're not pretending to be anything. And I think that was
Mhm.
such a hard thing. I went through so many years of like, oh, I'm gonna try to be like these people I like so that they'll like me more. It's just like it never worked out. Like it's not who I am. It's not like it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Like but you don't know that like as a teenager and you're just going through all your feelings and you
Mhm.
already, I mean, as a normal typical kid you already got those problems, but add the like sibling part of it, it's like, well, people really don't understand how you feel, right? And like
Yeah.
your parents can only do so much because they're dealing with your sibling, you're dealing with other like they can't even help you necessarily, and I don't know like what.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's like you don't want to say certain things in front of people because you like don't know how it's going to be perceived. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember not wanting to like really come forward about how I was feeling about my brother to my friends because I was like, oh, if I say like I'm embarrassed by him, then I look like the asshole for being
Yep.
embarrassed by my sibling with special needs. Like, but once I finally was able to have these conversations with other peers later, like they were
Yeah.
like, no, I 100% felt that way. And I was like, oh, I wasn't alone. Like this is, oh, thank God. Like I really thought I was here
Yeah.
and that I was the jerk, but really like he's
You're
like totally
yeah.
fine. And,
And
it was like, that was such a good feeling to be like, oh, okay. But you didn't know that at that age. Like you really
no,
were
no,
like,
not at
it
all.
was
Yeah,
kind
like
of lonely.
absolutely no. It's so lonely. Like I mean, and it's interesting because it's as I've talked to other people about this. Like we all understand what that means, but it fascinates me how much like other people who aren't Sims, how they like it's like a different. We have to like bridge that idea over, right? But it's just like it's so lonely for different reasons for different families and stuff. But it's just like
Hmm.
there. I think it's not until probably the last couple of years that I realized how many feelings that I even had at those times, let alone now. Like now it's better because I have like much more self awareness as adults and like going
Right.
through counseling and stuff. But yeah, there's so many things that I just suppressed like instantly. Like
Hmm.
something bad would happen, and then I would. And it's crazy how fast the brain can do that. I'm sure you have more science behind how that works, but it's just I would go to sleep next day, and it's like didn't happen. because it
Yeah.
was just easier. Like I've like versus dwelling on it because there'd be other times I would dwell on it, but I wouldn't sleep, and like you kind of just it doesn't
Yeah,
sit
you get
well
good
with
at
you, and
like compartmentalizing it and you're like, well, I don't want to come to my parents about it because you don't want to like burden them even more or
exactly.
something like that. And you're just like, you really do kind of cope with it in your own way of like kind of repressing it almost. And you're like,
Yeah. Yep.
"Nah." But you got to do what you got to do to like get by. And I think it does make us resilient. You know, it's, I think to
Yeah.
some extent as siblings, like I think my, because of Dick, you know, my embarrassment tolerance is like you gotta do a lot to, like, mess with me, like,
Actually,
to
yeah.
really
Yeah.
freak me out, um, which is great because I think in some ways I really remain calm in very, like, situations
Yeah.
that, you know, like, when I was a direct support staff, I would get paired with a lot of, like, my one-on-one, clients or,
Yeah.
you know, four-on-one where they would potentially do things or have meltdowns in public and just like calm, just a calm body. And because of Nick, I was able to like learn to do that and to be calm and to
Yeah.
be that presence for him, and so I can be that for others. um but it's still like you don't love for any kid to like be like, oh yeah, like I'm so glad you went through this adverse experience and that made you stronger.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't wish that on you, but
No.
it kind of
I would
did.
have been wishing on
And
myself. Like I would never like there were so many experiences I would never want to have again, but like I now can like okay, that wasn't so bad cuz right cuz you there's better things for it, but like it's so when you're like through the like resentment anger phase, which is always like a rotation and cycle of things, but I just like there's so many times I'm like, like what I would give to never have even had that experience to begin with would have been great. Like
yeah,
yeah, like I just yeah, there's yeah, because people, and this might be more like from TV and movie and stuff, but there's people who like, oh, like I loved high school, blah blah, and I'm like, I hated all of that. I hated all like any lower school, elementary school, middle school. Like I hated all of it. Like I don't know why you guys liked it so much, but I absolutely because that was like when I felt the most alone, right? Like that's the most like
yeah.
kind of
Hmm.
separated, disoriented I have felt, and I'm like, I don't have friends. They don't get it. I could try whatever, not try. Then you're just going through your regular hormones that suck already, right? And it's like I would never go back before high school and before wouldn't do it. Like
Well, and that's the
it's
thing that I think
terrible.
people discount is like it really in its own way can be like a trauma. Like it's not
Yeah,
necessarily like a capital T trauma, but it's like,
yeah,
it's a long drawn out experience, especially depending on your family situation that can be really negative. And
mm,
that's really hard on siblings, especially if there's barriers like care or like, it's just a like, being parentified and all like that's just like, just
yeah.
stacking it on. And that is so hard for siblings. And I think it does, how do you come out into adulthood and be like, yeah, no, I'm totally like well
Okay,
adjusted. This is fine.
yeah. It
Everything's good here.
yeah. And I don't know if this is part of your research or not, but like have you like in terms of like not the big trauma, but just like kind of like the little layers of it. Like, have you found that as a sibling, there's just an element of it that exists that doesn't exist in like normal kids that aren't siblings or anything like that? I don't know if I'm asking that question
Yeah.
properly.
I think if I'm understanding you, like kind of like, so you feel your question is like you
Well,
like
like so my philosophy or my theory is that like as a sibling, there is a certain level of trauma that just kind of inherently exists, and it's just kind of
mhm.
how extreme it gets depending on like your parents and living
Yeah,
situation. So I'm just
yes.
wondering versus kind of like like my husband it was just him, right? He's just
Right.
grew up as a kid. He's normal, whatever. But right, but difference between him and I, like the level of trauma I have, like I personally feel like it's like Mount Everest. Like
Yeah.
there's just a lot, and I was just like so what I've been telling myself is like other siblings have to be feeling this amount of kind of not trauma but just like chaos and whatever however we're describing it. So I just was wondering in your research have you found that that that's
Yeah.
true. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Okay.
Yes. It's definitely, and that's this is also what's kind of wild. Is it's not necessarily even described as a trauma in the research, but
Okay.
it totally is. Like, it's like you can kind of see
Okay.
the like overlap in kids that experience some like adverse life experiences. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of consider it one of those. And
Okay.
again, not to the same degree as like being like neglected and abused and
Yeah.
like some of the bigger stuff, but you can see it in like if you have a sibling that has really challenging behaviors, like would get
Mm-hmm.
really physically aggressive, like that's hard. So I
Yeah.
feel like the more severe your sibling's diagnosis is, um, the more challenging behaviors they had, um, verbal impairments, those
Mm-hmm.
kind of factors, or especially if your sibling like didn't present, like didn't look um,
Yeah. Like physically,
disabled
like you
too.
could. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so people are like, what's like just looking at you in public, like
They're like,
what's
what's
wrong with
wrong?
them, and they
Yeah.
don't see it, that too. So those kind of things I've definitely found to make, or have been shown to make that the sibling relationship a lot more strained. Which in my mind as a therapist, I'm like, okay, if the sibling relationship is strained, that means there's a lot of shit buried there,
You're
and
right.
there's probably some trauma, like, and that
Yeah. Yeah.
hasn't been unpacked and explored. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to ask you, because you're a professional. So that's why it's this conversation, like, and it's something I've been like kind of, it's been in the back of my head, and I'm not imposing that we all have that, like that's not what I'm saying, but it is an interesting thing, like the people that I've talked to that have gone to see a therapist in some form, or have gone to counseling in some form, right? And not to say, and it's different for everyone goes for different reasons, but it's just, it fascinates me from the sibling side of it, how common, whether they go to counseling or not, is we all share that thing. And I'm like, well, if that thing for me is having me go see a therapist, then I can't be the only one that feels
Hmm.
the amount. But it's just, I think the thing that's been hard, it's like inside it just feels so big, and it's very much, like, I'm kind of in this phase where I'm kind of like, it's kind of like the why me, why my family. I'm kind of in that phase of it, because it's just like, my life could have just been not this hard.
Yeah.
Because it's just, and that's just, I think that's just what it is, right? Like, as a sibling, I think we've all thought that once, twice, or 100 times. Like, it's just like,
Hmm.
why is our life so hard? And yes, there are better things for it, kind of like what we talked about earlier. Like, this podcast exists, and that's great, and like I'm proud of it. I'm proud of all the people who've like come on to like talk about stuff that's hard to talk about, right? And it's
Yeah.
great, but there's also a side of it that's just very sucky. That's,
Yeah.
people
No,
don't get it. Like, yeah,
it's true. I think there's healing in talking about it, and I think it's like I love how you use like you're in a phase of this, and I love that like you do. This is an ever evolving relationship. It's an ever
yeah,
changing, like your relationship with your sibling, and the quality of that relationship is ever evolving, and um, you know, I'm always going to be pro therapy. So yes, any sibling go to
yes,
therapy. I'm a
yeah,
huge advocate for it. So
yeah. So am
you
I.
never hear different. But
Yeah,
I think that's great. Like too, like depending on where they're at, and if they're in a space where they can, I think
hmm,
it is a changing relationship, and
yeah,
I feel like once you're able to talk about the hardships that you did endure, I think then once you like really just get to like unload that, and it's like it's such a weight that's
yeah,
lifted, and then you can really see the pros that there is, because they're there, like there's a
yes,
silver
they are.
lining and everything, and it's just
Yeah,
finding that silver lining, and whatever that looks like for you and your family, like. But like I feel like really fortunate enough to I do have some great friends from high school that
hmm,
um were very understanding, and
hmm,
I think where I couldn't necessarily be totally honest with them, but they were certainly curious about my brother's diagnosis and
yeah,
wanted to help, and they would look out for him. Like, and I never asked them to, but they would, if they were in like a club with him or something like that. Like,
hmm,
I knew they were my eyes and ears and would look out and report
yeah,
back. And they would ask questions like, "Oh, why does your brother do this? Like, why does he do that?" And I think it made them more kind and caring and compassionate
Oh, okay.
individuals.
Yeah.
And, I think it helped just erase their awareness of people with special needs. So I think, kind of in that sense, it was like my friends would say that, even he was a blessing for them, and they didn't even,
Yeah.
wasn't even
They
their
didn't even
sibling,
know.
but
Yeah, that wasn't even part of like the picture. It is just, but just being in friendship with you just had changed a lot. Yeah, it's
yeah, that he had that positive impact. And
yeah.
that's, it's like awesome that he had that, like, there's just ripple effects from having a sibling.
Yeah, and I think it's just it like they have so much power in both good and bad ways, just in
Yes.
the family and like with the people they interact with. But I think it's like definitely like the way the like yeah I there it's kind of it fascinates me how similar my sister and I are, being that now we both live away from our parents and away from each other, but there's so many commonalities that we have that fascinate me. Just I mean that, and that could be due to like genetics or not, or just coincidence, like who knows. But it's so fascinating how powerful like that connection is, even though like we can't necessarily communicate in the same way, or like my interactions with my friends and her what with her classmates is like different. Yeah, it's just it's so
Yes,
interesting how like they're all connected in ways
absolutely.
that you would never, you just underestimate their power as a general state for the good and evil of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Like, I think you're so right. Like, I love when my brothers and I get together, we kind of fall back into like old habits and patterns in a way that's both good and bad. Like, it
Yeah.
does, we start fighting, or we, like, and it's like dumb. I'm like 31 years old, and I
Yeah.
will literally start fighting with my youngest brother like we are children.
Like, and
And
you're
I'm like,
7, yeah.
who am I? I am like a professional, and I
Yeah.
am literally like, but it absolutely happens. And I love, though, when we do get together, like, immediately we start talking about like comedy shows that we watched, or sharing like humor, because
Yeah.
we really bonded over that as kids. So my dad would do this thing where we'd be in the car
Yeah.
on the way to school, and he would say, okay, um he would say a movie, like whatever the name of the movie was, and we would just have to quote movie lines. And for my brother, that was scripting.
Oh.
And he
Yeah.
also has perfect pitch, and so he can imitate his like voice.
What? He has
Yeah,
perfect pitch on. Oh, that's okay.
yeah.
That's
So his
unfair. As well,
his
I'm a
voice
yeah.
imitation skills are off the charts. So he would quote the movie line and like deliver it with this like flawless imitation.
I
And
oh man.
yeah, so we just have fun doing that. So like, I think, there's not a fun Nemo quote or something like that. Like, my family doesn't know. So now too, it's like dropping movie lines in conversation, especially like a deep pull, like a movie that no one's referenced in like years.
Yeah.
But seeing if like everyone else will like be
And they
like,
can
did you get
catch it.
it?
Like, yeah.
But I love that like that's something that we have that, really, even now, like, I'll seek out funny movies, or I'll seek out comedy shows, and text my brothers like, did you see this one? Like, you got to check it out.
Yeah.
And that's something that we all share.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So many fun things. Like, yeah, that. And that's the fun part about like being with other siblings. It's like there's a lot of it's so nice to go from like, hey, my life is very crappy, to we're like laughing about stuff that other people don't necessarily, they think it's funny. We think it's hilarious, which is like the best part about this podcast is like everyone gets to tell stories about their siblings that are genuinely funny, but
Hmm.
they it's always with the like, oh yeah, but like no, none of my friends get it, but I always laugh, and so they're always like, thank you for laughing. So I love it. Like it's so fun
Yeah.
because it is fun to laugh at them. Like it's just it's so easy. It's so funny, and you have to
Hmm.
like there's not it's
You
not
do,
yeah it's
because
just
humor is medicine. Like, humor
yeah
is important, and
yeah.
absolutely. Were there any like behaviors, or like any like funny phrases your sister had that like every time
Oh,
you just like are like start laughing, and you're like,
not
just, it's like classic.
I so yes and no. So my favorite one, which I'll give the context to it. Well, so I'll tell you the story, then what happens now. So we're at Knott's Berry Farm. We go into like their show because they do like a Snoopy indoor show thing, right? And so We're sitting there. It's AC. We're like, okay, it's so nice. It's cold. We're sitting there. We have to wait like 15 minutes, whatever. So my dad, I don't even remember what he showed me. He showed me something, and like it was outrageous. And I said, "Holy cow!" And my sister goes, "Moo!" Like super, like out of nowhere. And I just busted out laughing. And so we could talk about any animal out of context or in context, and she'll go like quack quack, or like she'll just make the sound of whatever animal, being that it's like we know one of the five major like farm animals, but she will always just say it doesn't matter. Like if we're eating it for dinner, if we're saying like we're having it, she will just moo, and I'm like okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah,
that.
so that's ours.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Such good stuff.
Oh.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we've like covered all. Yeah.
Yeah, we covered a lot of
What
stuff,
if we-
which is always good. That's always my like. I mean, there's a lot of favorite things on this podcast, but that one of them is just like we could just kind of go, and then it kind of always takes these like unexpected turns, but like for the better. Like
Yeah.
it's always so good and encouraging. So on that note, are there any words of encouragement you'd like to share with our fellow siblings?
Well, I kind of already gave it, but go to therapy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
really, there's so many amazing resources out there. Thanks to social media. I know social media can be it's good and bad side, but there are amazing like Facebook support groups and even just TikTok and Reddit pages, like anything like that, where you can find other siblings and connect. I like wish that was a thing when I was growing up, but now you've got podcasts and other stuff, so don't be afraid to seek it out. Even if you like literally just make this like random Facebook post, which God, I probably sound like such a millennial thing, like yeah, post
Yeah.
on Facebook. So all the Gen Zers listening to this are like, ew, what's
Yeah.
Facebook? But just like don't be afraid to seek it out. And like I think it's amazing, the power of like this, even seeing people post on Facebook and you can tell that they're afraid to, just this outpouring of support that they immediately get from the sibling community, I think is just incredible and just really powerful. So definitely you're not alone, and don't be afraid to seek it out, because there's so many more resources now than there ever was before. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Totally agree. There's so much out there. Go find whatever floats your boat. Books, podcasts,
Hmm.
newsletters, email, whatever. Yeah, go find it. Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Megan, for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was fun. It's my first
Cool.
one ever, so this is cool.
Yay! So exciting. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. It's definitely a tough journey being a sibling out there, so I hope you feel encouraged listening to other siblings share their stories. Here's a couple of ways you can support the podcast. Number 1, tell all your friends. We definitely need listeners to listen to the show. Number 2, please subscribe wherever you're listening to stay up to date on new siblings sharing their stories. Number 3, you can support us on Patreon. Even a small contribution can help keep the podcast up and running. And last but not least, if you're a fellow sibling, please consider being on the show. We definitely can't keep this show going without you. Even if it seems scary getting your story out there, know that only you can tell your story, and that we're all here to support you. And even if you don't want to be recorded, that's totally fine. I'd be more than happy to chat offline with any of you out there who want to continue to build this community of special needs siblings. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.